There are some places in the galaxy so dangerous they can only be explored by drones. Zornia is one of those places. Everything there wants to kill you, and it has the claws, teeth, and sheer determination to do it. We've taken pictures from orbit, sent down a few probes, but no one actually goes there. Except humans, of course. The HFY Science Consortium took an interest in Zornia because of its unusually competitive biosphere and conducted several studies on how a permanent research base could be established. The original plan was to burn away a small section of the native flora and build a fully enclosed city, like we did on Mien 4 and Kia. However, eradicating the local plants proved far more difficult. They grew back in as little as 2 or 3 days. Sterilizing a site meant scouring the soil down to the bedrock, and even then, some species burrowed so deep they were effectively unkillable. The only way to prevent immediate regrowth was to lay down reinforced Samo steel, and even that wasn't a permanent solution, as the planet's vegetation could rip apart almost any building material given enough time. The same went for the animals, which could tear through anything, including the temporary stations we parachuted onto the surface. A lot of equipment was lost to the wildlife, which would burrow through the walls and shred everything inside, looking for food. Zornia was classified as grade 12 extremely hazardous, and surface exploration was written off as impractical, not to mention likely to result in fatalities. From then on, all our research was conducted from orbit. There's only so much you can do with probes, but there's also a limit to what you can accomplish if you're dead. We warned the humans about the danger Zornia posed, but they insisted on sending a survey team anyway. We kept an automated rescue craft on standby for when they called for help. Humans are known to be resilient and aggressive, but we still expected their mission to end in disaster. To our surprise, they didn't die. In fact, they completed their mission without suffering a single casualty. Then, they sent another expedition. Again, no deaths. This puzzled us. Granted, humans are tough. Their native world Earth would probably rank at least a grade 10 or 11 if they hadn't wiped out most of their large predators. But Zornia's wildlife should still be lethal, even to a well-equipped adult male. Some of the predators weigh several tons, and the smaller ones often travel in swarms that can strip a carcass in minutes. While our technology would allow us to survive on Zornia's surface temporarily, even HFY engineering would eventually give way to the relentless biological assault. And human tech. It's markedly inferior to ours. We were missing something. And being scientists, we had to find out what. Unfortunately, we couldn't simply ask the humans to take one of our probes with them. The HFY Science Consortium has very strict rules about what technology can be given to other species, and since humans were at a relatively low-tech level compared to us, there was almost nothing we could share. We also didn't want to send one of our probes to spy on them. There was a risk they'd interpret it as an act of aggression, which, given humanity's reputation, we all agreed was not worth taking. This left us with only one option: a joint research expedition. In other words, we had to ask the humans if they were willing to let a couple of us accompany them down to the surface. We could bring some of our equipment with us, as long as we were there to supervise it. It would be the only way to get a first-hand look at Zornia. Of course, the Science Consortium also implied they were interested in learning more about human research methods. It's never a good sign when the easiest part of a plan is approaching a species of carnivorous aliens and asking for a ride, but there would be significant academic prestige for being the first HFY to set foot on Zornia. We drew lots. I'm still not sure if I won or lost, but either way, I ended up as the candidate. After I was selected, my esteemed colleagues decided that really only one of us was needed to supervise the equipment. There was no sense in risking anyone else. Bastards. I thought about backing out, but I knew my career wouldn't get another chance like this. Even if I didn't collect a scrap of data, I'd still have demonstrated my unrivaled commitment to science. Besides, there was always a chance the humans would say no. Then I could have my fruit pudding and eat it too. But the humans said yes. Bastards. In fact, they were extremely eager to undertake a joint expedition. I think they were glad someone from the wider galactic community was taking their scientific efforts seriously. It's hard being the new species on the block. Of course, we didn't mention that we wanted to study them as much as Zornia's wildlife. They emphasized that while they would take every precaution to ensure my safety, they couldn't 100% guarantee I'd make it back alive. I thought about backing out again. Did I really value my career enough to risk my neck for it? The answer was no, not really. But I am a scientist. My whole life's goal is to contribute to science, and I wasn't going to do that sitting on an orbital station reviewing probe data. As the saying goes, new discoveries hide where researchers fear to look. Usually this refers to the fear of intellectual nonconformity, but I didn't see why it couldn't also apply to the fear of ending up in an alien predator's stomach. The humans made space for me on their next expedition. I didn't have long to ferment in my own terror. I almost had a panic attack on the shuttle ride over to the human ship, but I managed to stay conscious and introduce myself to my new colleagues without making a complete embarrassment of myself. The humans were reasonably pleasant. Well, some of them were. There were 21 humans on the research team. 4 introduced themselves right away: Dr. Kale Doran, Dr. Lyra Solis, Dr. Ren Ivra, and Astra Valen, the leader of the expedition. They were welcoming and eager to make sure I had everything I needed. The rest of the team, however, were intimidating. They ignored me, going about their duties with brisk efficiency. I got the impression that it would be safer to stay away from them. Astra Valen was particularly imposing. She had a few scars on the right side of her face and a prosthetic eye. She reminded me of an old predator, hardened by years of defending her territory. When she spoke to me, it was brief. She welcomed me aboard and emphasized that I was to follow her orders at all times. Doing otherwise would put my safety at risk. I'm still not sure if she meant from Zornia's wildlife or from her. We landed on Zornia in a heavily armored vehicle. The journey down was rougher than I was used to, but I managed. The vehicle had 2 trailers, each with large, reinforced wheels. When we landed, the turrets on top of the trailers unfolded, scanning the area. Even with all this armor, I knew Zornia's wildlife could tear through it given enough time. The team moved out with practiced precision. The black-suited members of the team fanned out in a protective circle, while the white-suited researchers and I followed in the middle. Astra Valen reminded me not to activate my suit jets unless it was an absolute emergency, a warning I took seriously. We made our way to a cave the humans had identified during an orbital scan. The humans sent a drone in first, which reported no immediate threats inside. But once we entered the cave, something on the bioscanner suggested otherwise. The black suit switched from scanning to what I now realized were weapons. Then, out of nowhere, it attacked a long, thin predator with enormous fangs. Before it could strike, the black suits opened fire. It exploded in a flash of light and sound, reduced to pieces in seconds. Zornia's apex predator didn't stand a chance. We left the cave with the creature's remains trailing behind us. Humans 1, Zornia 0. After our successful encounter with Zornia's apex predator species ZC0084, the atmosphere in the rover was oddly calm. The humans, particularly the black-suited ones, showed no signs of the adrenaline rush that I would have expected after such a confrontation. To them, it was just another day in the field. As for me, I was struggling to keep my heart rate steady. My suit's interface kept blinking, warning me of rising stress levels, but I ignored it. I had to. I wasn't going to let them see me panic. We drove deeper into Zornia's unforgiving landscape, moving away from the shrub forests and towards a large river valley that had been identified as our next research site. The valley was unusual. According to previous probe data, the river wasn't just a source of water, it was highly reactive, almost caustic. Something in the water triggered rapid growth in nearby plants, making the area one of the most hostile zones on the planet. Naturally, it was of high interest to the Science Consortium. Astra Valen had been keeping a close eye on me since the cave. She must have noticed my unease. "You're doing fine, Dr. Sothis," she said, her voice as cold and steady as always. "We've had worse days on this planet. Stay focused, follow instructions, and you'll get your data." I nodded, trying to hide my nervousness. Humans were so direct. They faced danger without flinching. I couldn't tell if that made them admirable or terrifying. Probably both. We reached the valley by mid-afternoon. The landscape was nothing short of alien beauty. Huge, towering plants lined the banks of the river, their twisted, serpentine roots digging deep into the ground, siphoning the toxic water. The air was heavy with the smell of sulfur, and the entire valley seemed to pulse with life. But there was something unsettling about it too, like the planet itself was watching us, waiting. As the rover parked on a rocky outcrop, Dr. Cale Doran and Dr. Lyris Solis immediately began setting up their instruments. I joined them, eager to distract myself with the scientific work at hand. We needed to collect samples of the plants and water for further analysis, and I had my chemical sampler at the ready. The black suits, led by Astrovalan, spread out to secure the perimeter. They didn't speak, didn't interact much, but their movements were methodical, almost unnervingly synchronized. Just as we were about to deploy the first set of drones over the river, Ren Evra muttered something under his breath. I turned to see him staring at one of his displays, frowning. "Something wrong?" I asked, my voice sounding far too eager to cover my unease. "Not sure," he said, tapping the screen. "We're picking up unusual bioelectric signals from the reverb. Strong ones." My heart sank. If there was one thing Zornia had taught us, it was that unusual signals usually meant something big, and something dangerous. "What kind of signals?" I asked, already suspecting the answer. "Multiple sources," Evra replied. "Could be large organisms. Could be something else. Either way, they're moving before I could react." Astrovalan appeared at our side. "How close?" she asked, her voice tense for the first time. "Approximately 50 meters under the river," Devra answered. "But they're getting closer." The air in the rover suddenly felt heavy. I could see the other black suits exchanging quick glances. Even they seemed unnerved. Valen didn't waste any time. "We're pulling back," she ordered. "Dr. Sothas, pack your equipment." Everyone else were retreating to high ground. My hands were shaking as I scrambled to pack my sampler and other tools, trying not to think about what could be lurking beneath the surface. The black suits, however, were moving with their typical efficiency, already securing the perimeter and signaling the rover to start moving. Then, just as we were about to leave, the ground beneath us trembled. At first it was subtle, a faint vibration, but within moments it turned into a full-blown quake. The earth groaned and shifted, and before anyone could react, a massive geyser of water erupted from the river, shooting high into the air. The water wasn't just toxic, it was acidic, and it splashed across the landscape, sizzling as it hit the ground. Something massive was emerging. I saw it before anyone else did, a shadow beneath the surface of the river, growing larger with each passing second. It was immense, far bigger than anything we had encountered so far on Zornia. The rover shook again, and I was nearly thrown off my feet as the ground split open, revealing a gargantuan creature. Its body was serpentine, armored with thick, iridescent scales. 4 enormous eyes, glowing faintly with bioelectric energy, locked onto us. Its head alone was the size of the rover, and from its mouth, dripping with acidic saliva, extended rows of needle-sharp teeth. This was no ordinary predator. This was something ancient, something the probes had never detected. "Get in the rover," now Astrovalan barked. I barely made it inside before the creature lunged at us. The rover's engines roared to life, and we sped away, the massive tires tearing through the underbrush as the creature's colossal form rose from the river. It let out a deep, rumbling growl that shook the very ground beneath us. But the humans, unfazed, were already preparing for combat. Through the rover's windows, I could see the black suits bracing themselves, their weapons trained on the creature. Valen was in command, her voice sharp and clear over the comms. "Fire on my mark." Aim for the eyes. The creature reared back, preparing to strike again, and then, without warning, it lunged, a blur of scale and muscle. The black suits opened fire in perfect unison. Bright flashes of energy weapons cut through the air, each shot aimed with precision. The creature roared in pain as its first eye was struck, a blinding flash of light erupting from the impact. But it wasn't enough. The creature kept coming, slamming its enormous body into the side of the rover, sending us skidding across the valley floor. I held on to my seat for dear life, my suit's systems struggling to keep me conscious as alarms blared in my ears. The humans didn't flinch. Astravalon kept her calm, issuing rapid orders as the creature circled us, preparing for another strike. More power to the front turrets, she commanded. We're not letting this thing take us down. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The humans were not just surviving, they were fighting back. They didn't seem to have the same sense of hopelessness in the face of this monstrous planet that I did. In fact, they seemed to thrive on it. The rover shook again as the creature rammed into us, but the black suits fired another volley, this time striking its remaining eyes. The creature let out a final, deafening roar, thrashing wildly as it was blinded. It retreated back toward the river, its massive form disappearing beneath the acidic waters. We all sat in stunned silence, the rover finally coming to a stop. The air was thick with the stench of sulfur and burnt flesh, and I could feel my body trembling inside my suit. I glanced at Astravalon. She was already on the comms, sending a report back to orbit. Humans 2, Zornia 0, I muttered to myself, though I wasn't sure how much longer our luck would last. The mission wasn't over. In fact, I had a sinking feeling it had only just begun. I felt much better being back under the open blue sky, with sunlight shining down on us. My confidence in the humans' ability to handle whatever Zornia threw at us had definitely increased. Then I saw the swarm species of 522, the same species that had frustrated our earlier survey attempts, had finally decided it was time to defend its territory. I noticed them a few seconds before the humans, whose eyesight isn't as sharp as an Amia's. I was just about to shout a warning when they picked them up on the drone feed. Immediately, the posture of the group shifted from casual to alarmed. One of the black suits suggested we make a run for the rover, which was about 50 meters ahead behind a shrub mound, but the swarm was closing in from the right. Astravalon quickly disagreed. We won't make it in time. I wasn't an expert on humans, but I could tell they were worried. They knew what species of 522 was. They called them dragonflies, and apparently any previous encounters with them had not been pleasant. I don't know enough about Earth animals to say how close these things were to actual dragonflies, but a 522 was about as long as an adult human's arm. They had 4 translucent wings and an iridescent blue-green exoskeleton. Their long, tail-like abdomen and stubby heads were dominated by 4 large eyes and 4 fangs, each almost 10 centimeters long. Their fangs, made of a chitinous substance with metallic compounds, were sharper and stronger than steel. They closed into a beak-like point when not in use, but their main hunting strategy was simple dive-bombing their prey and impaling it on their razor-sharp fangs. At least I had some proof that the humans were saying anyone would be afraid of those things. Valen was right, we didn't have time to reach the rover. The dragonflies were already diving by the time we noticed them. We started backing up toward the cave's mouth, but the rocky ground made it difficult to retreat while keeping an eye on the sky. The humans, black-suited soldiers, started firing their weapons again. The blasts were just as loud and bright as they'd been inside the cave. 1 or 2 dragonflies dropped, but the rest scattered, one of the reasons they were so hard for our probes to deal with. Even with wide-area stunners, our drones could only take out a few before the swarm dispersed and overwhelmed them with sheer numbers. Making the swarm scatter bought us a little time. The black suits continued firing, while the white-suited scientists, myself included, headed for the relative safety of the cave. You might think I'm slow on the uptake, but remember, I'm a zoologist, not a xenosociologist. At this point, I finally realized that the humans in the black suits weren't scientists. I was surrounded by soldiers. Under normal circumstances, this might have been concerning. But right then, I had bigger problems. Mainly that I was a lot slower on foot than my human colleagues. I decided to risk using my suit's jets for a short hop that brought me near the cave entrance. That was as much as I dared. Jets don't have the same finesse as wings, and I wasn't about to risk flying headfirst into a stalactite. I glanced back. The soldiers were still firing, backing up toward the cave, their weapons creating a near-constant roar. Dragonflies dropped from the air like autumn leaves, torn apart mid-flight. Their weapons must have been firing some kind of solid projectiles, which penetrated the exoskeletons easily. How they managed to hit such small, fast-moving targets was beyond me. Almost as impressive was their coordination. The soldiers maintained formation while walking backward and firing at the same time. It was seamless. Every few seconds, a weapon would go silent as the soldier ejected a cartridge and reloaded, with another stepping in to cover them. They moved like clockwork. But it wasn't enough. There were too many dragonflies, and while they were dropping by the dozen, hundreds more remained. They were starting to cluster again, ready for a coordinated dive attack. Instinctively, they knew they were harder to stop when they attacked together. I started climbing through the stalagmites, glancing at the white-suited scientists. They were almost at the cave mouth and would probably make it. But I wasn't sure about the soldiers. I willed them to hurry. Every instinct told me they should run for it, but those instincts were based on having wings. If they stayed in the open, the swarm would overwhelm them. If they ran, they wouldn't make it in time. Then I noticed something. The soldiers carrying devices similar to my chemical sampler had stopped and raised them. I barely had time to wonder what they were doing when suddenly there was fire. 2 arcs of flame burst from the nozzles with a whoosh. The heat was intense, even from my distance. They hit the swarm dead center, breaking it apart as dragonflies scattered in all directions, some plummeting to the ground as burning torches, others trailing flames through the air. The fuel the flamethrowers used was sticky and highly flammable. The dragonflies shrieked as they burned. It was the first sound they made other than the buzzing of their wings, and still they didn't give up. Like all of Zornia's wildlife, they were hyper-aggressive and wouldn't stop until they were feasting on us. But the flamethrowers had bought us more time. The black suits continued firing as they retreated toward the cave, but some of the dragonflies were too disoriented to aim properly, smashing into the rocky formations. I saw one soldier narrowly dodge a dragonfly aimed right at his head. The creature embedded itself in the rock behind him, buzzing angrily as it tried to free its fangs. I made it into the cave and found a thick stalagmite to hide behind just as more dragonflies crashed into the jagged rocks. Some made it into the cave, but their vision seemed poor in the darkness. They buzzed around aimlessly while others became fascinated with the tail lights of species ZC083, still hanging from the cave ceiling. Some of the ZC083s took the opportunity to try and eat the dragonflies, but that ended badly for both species. ZC083 couldn't swallow them, and several fell from the ceiling in a locked struggle. Eventually, the last of the dragonflies flew off or got caught, and Dr. Kale Doran and I collected a few specimens while the soldiers kept watch. As we were herded out of the cave, I expected to see human bodies scattered across the ground, but there weren't any. The humans had survived the swarm completely unscathed, or so I thought. Then I saw one of the soldiers Torin Cade, I think had a dragonfly lodged through his thigh. The thing was still wriggling, its fangs embedded deep in the muscle. I've got a strong stomach, but something about the way it squirmed made me want to throw up inside my helmet. One of the other soldiers called out, "Hey, looks like Cade made a friend." Laughter followed, flagged by my translation software. Somehow, the humor made me feel better. At least they weren't panicking, which meant Cade probably wasn't going to die. "Shut up and get it out of me," Cade growled. Astravalen spoke sharply, and the laughter stopped immediately. "Yes, Major," the others responded, almost by rote. My translation software flagged the word Major. And I realized for the first time that Valen wasn't just the leader of this expedition, she was a high-ranking military officer. I suddenly felt very aware of how much power she wielded, especially here, on this hostile world. Valen decided it was too risky to remove the dragonfly right then, so they cut off the creature's head and decided to carry Cade back to the rover. My stomach turned again as I watched the dismembered insect wriggle in his leg, but the soldiers sterilized the area with their flamethrowers to prevent infection. Once we were back in the rover, they were able to remove the dragonfly properly. I assumed the expedition would be over. Cade surely needed medical evacuation, but to my surprise, the team's medic declared it a flesh wound as long as it hadn't severed any arteries. Cade was in no immediate danger. I knew humans were resilient, but I was still shocked by how quickly he bounced back. Any Amia would have been catatonic from such an injury. The expedition continued. I now understood why the Science Consortium had approved this joint mission so easily. Our knowledge of humans was limited, and clearly there was much more to learn. Yes, Zornia was dangerous, but the humans were more of a mystery and potentially more dangerous than we realized. The rest of the expedition went smoothly. We made several more stops, collecting samples and pushing further into Zornia's wilderness. By the fifth and final stop, I was feeling much more at ease with the humans. Or so I thought. We reached a swampy area for our final samples. I suggested I fly in alone to collect them quickly, but Valen refused. So there I was, hovering just above the water, guarded by 4 human soldiers wading through the swamp. It wasn't long before the bioscanner picked something up. It was at the very edge of the scanner's range, barely detectable. The soldiers around me exchanged glances, their calm professionalism unwavering. Without a word, we turned around and started heading back toward the shore. The soldiers on the bank were already in position, weapons raised, ready for anything. I hovered just above the water, trying to stay calm, but the stillness of the swamp unnerved me. Then, the surface started to bubble. The water exploded upward in a geyser of mud and algae. Something massive hauled itself up from the murky depths. It must have been buried beneath the bog, and as it emerged, mud slid off its enormous, glistening form. It stood at least 3 meters tall, its body segmented like an insect's, with 8 legs. The bottom 4 legs were thick and powerful, while the top 4 were agile, clawed appendages that scraped at the swamp muck as it moved. Its abdomen was swollen, nearly spherical, and its head, if you could call it that, was a nightmarish ring of sharp, interlocking teeth. As much as my scientific mind tried to take note of its anatomy, double thorax, heavily armored carapace, predator class, it was the non-scientist part of my brain screaming at me to run. I needed to get out of there fast. The soldiers started firing immediately, but their bullets bounced off the creature's thick exoskeleton. Even the flamethrower, so effective against the dragonflies, did little more than singe the swampy coating on the creature's shell. It didn't flinch as it moved toward us, its clawed limbs snapping the air menacingly. I pumped more power into my suit's jets, skimming across the swamp surface, desperately heading for the shore. I thought about flying upward, but I imagined myself escaping this thing only to be snatched out of the air by a flying predator. No, I had to stay low, but I wasn't the one in real trouble. The 4 human soldiers were slogging through the thick mud, moving far too slowly. The creature was gaining on them. The soldiers on the bank continued to fire, but nothing seemed to slow it down. It was unstoppable. I reached the shore and stopped, hovering just above the ground. I turned, heart pounding, to see how the others were faring. The soldiers were still struggling through the swamp, and the behemoth was nearly upon them. Grenade, one of the soldiers beside me, shouted. A small explosion rocked the creature's side, but it barely noticed. Its carapace was simply too thick. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. For the first time, it looked like the humans had met their match. I heard Astra Valen barking orders over the comms, telling the rover crew to position themselves. The soldiers were nearly at the shore, but the creature was just as close. My heart raced as I watched the scene unfold, my feathers standing on end. The tension was unbearable. Would they make it? Could they make it? Suddenly the creature flinched, its movements slowing for a moment. A lucky hit had struck its fleshy mouth parts, but it wasn't enough. It was still coming, lowering its head and barreling toward the shoreline. Just as the first soldier reached dry land, something impossibly bright flashed past me. A blinding light tore through the creature's abdomen, punching straight through to the other side. A split second later, I heard the thunderous roar of an explosion, followed by a shock wave that nearly knocked me out of the air. I stopped, stunned. Another shot whizzed past me, and this time one of the creature's upper legs was severed clean off, sent spiraling through the air. The sound of the blast hit a moment later, loud enough to make me dizzy. A third shot followed, hitting the creature square in the head. There was a gruesome spray of liquefied tissue, and the behemoth took a few staggering steps before collapsing to the ground with an earth-shaking thud. For a moment, I just hovered there, stunned. Then I turned to see the rover. It had pushed through the dense vegetation, its wheels half sunk into the mud. On its roof, the metal tube of the turret smoked lightly, evidence of the shots that had saved our lives. I had already theorized that the observation turrets might be weapons, but seeing them in action was something else entirely. That cannon could take down a small spaceship. I was alive, and so were the soldiers, but the sheer power of what we were carrying made my stomach churn. The last remnants of my commitment to low-impact, ecologically sensitive science had evaporated. If this was the alternative, I couldn't complain. Still, the rover's firepower wasn't what terrified me most. Back at the drop site, while we waited for the shuttle to arrive, the mood had lightened. We made idle conversation, recounting the day's events. I made an offhand comment about how the Amius Science Consortium would never give us the budget to develop such impressive weaponry. If we couldn't do it with off-the-shelf stunner drones, we'd never get the funding for an expedition like this. Astravalen glanced at me and replied casually, "This is all standard military hardware." My brain stalled for a second. Standard military hardware? Why would anyone need weapons of this magnitude unless they were on a planet like Zornia? It's not like worlds as dangerous as this were common. Humans hadn't visited any others as far as I knew. Then it hit me. They designed these weapons to use on each other. When the shuttle finally arrived, I was quiet. I greeted my colleagues on the orbital station with a smile, refrained from giving those backstabbing bastards any piece of my mind, and retreated to my quarters to write my report. I tried to be as honest and thorough as possible, not letting any sensational details obscure my overall impressions, while still not leaving out anything strange or unsettling. My final opinion on humans? I liked them. They were friendly, accommodating, eager to keep me safe, and committed to the cause of science. I could even see myself becoming friends with some of them, particularly Dr. Cale Doran. In many ways, they're easy to work with, and I can see our species developing a mutually beneficial relationship in the future. But by all the stars, they terrify me. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel. For every comment that says we will heart every single one of them, thank you for your time.